Good afternoon. How are you doing? Thanks so much for coming to the session. And we're going to introduce ourselves properly, because I haven't really given you a proper introduction, and hand over as well to Errol. We're sharing this session together. So why don't you go first, Errol, introduce yourself and say what you're going to do.
That's not what we rehearsed. Hi everyone, my name is Errol Donald. Errol Donald, not Errol Donald. And I'm an artist and creative wellbeing practitioner and consultant. And I will be hosting the second half of today's session.
I hear you. Thank you, Errol. Thank you so much. I met you downstairs, so you know a little bit about me, but I'll just say a bit more. So a reminder that I am Sarah, and I work as a coach, and I run lots of programs as well on anything to do with confidence. So that's mostly around things like presentation skills or having conversations with people or influencing. And I also have a very small consultancy called The Power of Three, and we work with organisations on inclusion. Because we believe that if you create an inclusive environment, diversity will thrive, as opposed to starting with diversity and hoping that it all works out. And today, what I'm having a chat with you really for half an hour is about brave conversations. My passion as a coach is to help people work through real barriers or perceived barriers so that they can make positive change. And we talked a bit about that downstairs, didn't we, with Natalie and Gayleen. And in my experience, the first step to making a positive change in our lives is really to have a conversation with someone about something. And that conversation might require a bit of courage. And it's an important conversation that we sometimes avoid as well. So I'll just ask you immediately, what is the reason that we avoid important conversations? Why do we avoid them? Yes.
So previously for myself, I can say I felt, it's not burnout, but you've been stung, or it's had a negative impact the last time you've done it, and so that's why then obviously you're not as confident to go ahead and do it again.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So we've tried it before and there's a legacy and it's made us lose a bit of confidence as well. There's a bit of a risk, isn't there? Thank you. What else? Yeah.
Because you're scared of the answer.
Yes, we're scared of the answer. We're scared of what actually might be said in response. I'll say more about that. Thank you. You're going to say something.
It was pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
Feeling uncomfortable.
Yes.
Faced with anything.
We could be faced with the unexpected, couldn't we? Absolutely. Anything else? Anything else? Yeah.
Sometimes it's about me wanting to make things easier for the other person, like not wanting to make a problem, just making it nice and easy.
Absolutely, because we're caring so much for the other person, we're worried about what the impact on what that might be, so we hold ourselves back from having the conversation. Yeah, and then I'll come to you.
I think also following on for that really good point, it can also feel easier for you in the short term, like you're divided between whether or not it's the right thing to do versus like just kind of withdrawing and not doing it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Often in that moment we think, well, just kind of step back from it actually. It seems like the easier option. And you were going to say something?
Because, you're scared of change. Even if you know you have that conversation, it's actually change that you think you want, you're actually scared of getting it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like be scared for what you wish for, sort of a thing. Absolutely. Were you going to say something as well? Oh, go on.
I was going to say a very similar thing, being scared of the outcome
Yeah.
and the action that then might result in change.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a lot of fear, isn't there? There's quite a lot of fear. We're like, what might happen? What happens if I get what I want? What if they say something unexpected? What if there's an emotional outcome to it? What if something bad might happen? What happens if we don't have important conversations in our lives, though?
Things never change. Stagnant.
Say that again?
Things will never change.
Things will never change. Stagnant or get worse. So I'll just ask you to think now. I bet you there's a conversation in your life that's on your mind and you haven't had it. I won't ask you to disclose what it is, but sometimes people say, this is a conversation I should have had for 10 years. It might be a conversation in your family and your significant relationships at work, but there's a conversation that just lingers. And quite often those conversations play around in our heads, don't they? Over and over again, and there's like a big sort of 3-act drama happening when we imagine the things that they're going to say back to us. And of course, sometimes, especially in organisations, these conversations get left to the point where it then becomes, it's kind of like too late to have it. I'm sure you've all worked with somebody who's got a difficult reputation and no one's ever tackled it. I'm sure you've had that. I hear that all the time, like this person has been behaving like this for 10 years, but no one's ever dealt with it. So I wanted to have this conversation with you in the context of care-fueled leadership, because when we put the lens and the emphasis on care, as we should, it can also get in the way of us being honest. I'm not sure if any of you have read any of Kim Scott's work around radical candor. Yeah, so Kim Scott says it's really important to speak directly and at the same time care personally. So that makes sense. But in an environment that I experience a lot in arts and culture is there's so much focus on care that there's sometimes not enough candor. And she calls this ruinous empathy. That we're so empathic of others that we're first of all not getting our needs met, but second of all, we're protecting people from actually learning. And if we protect people from learning, that's a loss, isn't it? So what we're going to do now for the next, say, 20-ish minutes is I was asked to give you top tips. So this is going to sound exhausting. I've got 20 top tips. Apparently people only remember 3 things, so pick your 3. We'll go through the top tips. I want speed. They're literally just like practical top tips, and then time for questions, and then hand over to Errol as well. So I've got a picture for each tip, mostly so I keep on track. Okay, so this is a mindset thing. Being honest is actually being kind. So when I'm working with people in their conversations that they want to prepare for, they'll go, this is what I need to say, Sarah, but I want to say it in a nice way, which I understand the sentiment of, but it doesn't always help. Saying it in an honest way is more helpful, with a caveat, as long as it's delivered with some skill. So I'm sure you've met somebody who'll say things like, I'm just honest, I just say it as it is. Have you ever met that kind of people? My mother. Yeah. I'm just direct, Sarah, I don't beat around the bush, but it's a bit like brutal honesty. So how do you develop this skill to just say what needs to be said? So being honest is a good thing. You actually help other people. This is something I've really thought about a lot, and particularly when I'm working in the arts and culture sector, that it's really helpful to treat people as though they are resourceful, with the caveat, unless you know otherwise. So in a care-fueled environment, there's a risk sometimes that we treat people as though they're very fragile. Does that make sense? It's like we're so worried we're going to hurt someone that we deny their ability to be resourceful and resilient. So unless you know otherwise, people actually, well, Natalie said it downstairs, didn't she? People like to be told the truth if it's done in a caring way. And I actually heard someone say something the other day which made sense to me. They said, when somebody gives me positive feedback, I trust it more if at some point they've also given me negative feedback. That's something to think about, isn't it? Because it feels authentic. If I'm just praising you all the time, that might kind of feel a bit empty. But if I'm always saying, you know what, there's also this other thing that would make you even more effective. There's this other thing that you could be doing differently. It would feel more authentic as well. So treat people as though they are resourceful. And I can say that as somebody who's worked for the Samaritans for many, many years as well, that it gives people agency to believe in them even when they don't believe in themselves. Any thoughts or questions about that concept? Any thoughts or questions? Makes sense, doesn't it? Makes sense. So I just want to start with a mindset. People are resourceful, even if they don't appear so. If you believe in them in your leadership, if you believe in them when they don't believe in themselves, great things can happen. Okay, so have the real conversation. What do you think I mean by that? Have the real conversation. What does that mean?
That's like not beating around the bush, isn't
Yeah, not beating around the bush, yeah. Sometimes you'll hear people go, well, if I just kind of ask a few questions and try and lead in, then maybe it'll just all of a sudden come to them that they're a bit of a, no, that's not going to happen. So you've got to go, my top tip before a conversation is, what is the key objective of this conversation? So for instance, if my key objective for this conversation was, I just want that person to say sorry, is that a helpful objective? No, it's not. Why isn't it?
No reason behind why.
Yeah, there's no reason, but also, how much influence have I got over that outcome? So it'd be more helpful for me, wouldn't it, to say, I want to give that person feedback about how that situation impacted me. One outcome might be that they'll say sorry, but actually that's a bit I don't have control over. Yes.
Sarah, do you think that both parties, say it's just a one-on-one conversation, need to have the same key objective or need to know what that key objective is for each other at the start of the conversation?
Brilliant question. So it can feel disingenuous, can't it, if you go, can you just come at 2 o'clock for a chat?
Yeah.
And then you come in and it's quite a big situation. So that can feel disingenuous. At the same time, it depends on the person. If I said, I want you to come in to have a chat with me at 2 p.m. about your behaviour in the meeting this morning, that might also inflame. So it depends on the situation and the person. My personal opinion is immediately in the conversation, tell the person why they're there in the room. So for instance, if you'd interrupted me in a meeting a few times, you talked over me a few times, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about, can you imagine if I asked you to come for a chat and I said, so just how do you think meetings are going at the moment? And yeah, just wondering about the meeting this morning, anything you think that would have made it. So what does the other person start to feel? They feel there's sort of an inequality in the agenda. Like, I know what I want to talk about. You're starting to guess what it is. And Natalie said that downstairs, didn't she? She said, if you're not clear, people start to assume and feel psychologically unsafe. Whereas if I said, look, I'm going to be straight up with you. I want to talk to you about what happened in the meeting this morning and how we can have, even better meetings in the future. You're going to feel safer, aren't you? Because you know why we're in the room. So have the real conversation. By the way, I've no idea why I picked a yellow laptop for this, but I literally couldn't find anything, so sorry about the graphic. What do you think I mean by checking assumptions before you have an important conversation? What do you think I mean? Yeah.
Well, like in that example there, I might assume you interrupted me loads because you're a dickhead.
Yeah.
But actually, there might be something else.
Exactly. We tend to make up so much stuff about people, don't we? We kind of think, what are their motives? What are their values? Why are they behaving like that? What they think about me? We make up loads of stuff. What happens if you've got that in a narrative and you take it into a conversation? How do you think that might impact the conversation? Yeah.
You assume you already know the outcome.
Absolutely. And so then what happens?
You lead the conversation and you're going to be coming up against a brick wall.
Absolutely. The chances are I'm only listening to what I think is being said, and I'm actually not listening to what is being said, and I'll probably only get the outcome that I assumed I would anyway as well. So rather than checking assumptions, it's really helpful to master your story and be open to knowing that, there's some stuff that you just don't know. You just don't know. Just checking. Please raise a hand. Any questions? The only thing, really, that we can plan for in a conversation is, what do I want the outcome to be? Because anything can happen, can't it? What do I want the outcome of this conversation to be? There's no point in scripting loads of questions. There's no point in imagining what they're going to say and sort of planning responses to it, because it stops you being present. It really does. Know your triggers. Know your triggers. So no matter how well prepared you are, it's possible that in a conversation, something might happen and you might lose a little bit of self-management. Anyone ever had that? Like you've planned it and you think, I've got this, and then all of a sudden something happens, and I don't know if you've experienced this, I do it frequently. Stuff's coming out your mouth, and the brain goes, no. No. But it's gone, hasn't it? It's done. And that's often because we've just been triggered. So, and also what we notice in other people, we notice when other people are triggered, don't we? And it's dead subtle. What kinds of things do we notice in people when you just know that something's happened, they're triggered? It is. What is it? What do you notice?
Heckles up.
So it might tighten the shoulders and tighten jaw. What was that? Yeah, someone might kind of close off a bit. There's a classic one that's quite subtle, but we really pick up on it, which is people's blink rate lowers. I'm still being nice, but I am fucked off. You know that feeling? So it's tonal, isn't it? It's tonal. And we notice it in other people, don't we? It's like, oops. And then what do we typically do? We just carry on. Oh, yeah, I don't know if you've read this work about the chimp paradox. Steve Peters talks about, he's a sports psychologist, talks about, the amygdala, the fight or flight part of your brain. He talks about that being your emotional chimp. And when your emotional chimp surfaces, it does things that are slightly out of control, and it typically triggers someone else's chimp. Before you know it, you're in a conversation and just the wheels have come off. Have you ever had that? Yeah. I was speaking to someone in one of the CLOR programs, and he gave me permission to share this story, but without naming him or the organisation. He said, Sarah, I'm like a really measured guy. He said, but I was in this meeting, and it was kind of like an all hands thing. They were standing up. And they were kind of like standing, and it was his chief exec I don't know what the conversation was, but he was announcing some changes that were going to be made. And my coaching client said he was standing, and he had his hand in his pocket, and he said he just felt fury. And he said he don't know what happened, but in a blink of an eye, he had money in his pocket, coins. I must have been pre-pandemic when we carried money around. He said that he just took money out and he just threw it. He said he just threw it across the room at the chief exec. And he said it was, when things slowed down? He said it was just, and then he said everything went in slow motion, and literally straight after it went, couldn't believe it had happened. But that's like an extreme chimp moment. So you need to know, first of all, what are the things that trigger you? What are the things that trigger you? Who would share? What are the things that trigger you? Yeah.
Criticism.
Yeah.
Criticizes me.
Yeah, that's a common one. Someone criticises you, can get a bit triggery.
Being interrupted, so not being heard.
Oh yes, I hate that. Yeah.
Feeling that people are being treated maybe with inequality.
Yes, and fairness and equality, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say someone throwing someone else under the bus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone not listening properly.
Oh yes, that's a classic.
Somebody being condescending.
Oh, I hate that. Especially when someone's like passive aggressive or sarcastic in tone, but they're like, be nice to your face. I'm gonna kill them.
Being shut down before you've had a chance to say your piece by someone who maybe knows like the art of discourse more than you do, for example.
Oh, it's that power playing, isn't it? It's so annoying, yeah.
I think similar to that, but also like when you've kind of said something and made a statement, and someone in a more senior position comes in and kind of reiterates that statement in their own way.
Yes, that sounds like a familiar situation, absolutely. So what's helpful, and this takes such a high degree of self-management and emotional intelligence, is in the moment to not only be in the conversation, but in your body. That's emotional intelligence, isn't it? That you're speaking, you're also noticing what's happening to you, you're noticing what's happening to the other person, and you're constantly making choices whilst being authentic. That's it, isn't it? And knowing your triggers. And Steve Peters, I'll come to you one sec. Steve Peters says, the best way to deal with the chimp, when you just feel like the heat or the frost or the tightness of jaw, is to engage with the logical part of your brain, which is noticing that's happened and making a choice. I've just got to take a breath. I'm just going to ask a question. I need to gather myself. You're going to say something.
I can't answer the question there, but like it's with if you know your triggers, and like say for example, like you're condescending me, and like you feel grounded, you feel fine, and then for whatever reason, the next time that happens, it just goes. Like, how do you kind of control that?
You mean if the chimp happens?
Yeah, as in like, for example, like I know what my triggers are, and most of the time I'll be like, oh, here we go again, it's the same person.
Yes, yeah.
You kind of have that narrative in your head, oh, here we go. But then like, the same conversations happen, like pretty much words with the same conversations, but you're just in a bad mood, and it just makes you go. How do you like control that bit, which is kind of what you just think.
You mean in the moment, yeah. So there's a couple of things. One is to notice it and do something about it. The other one, which feels slightly riskier, is to share it. Is to share it with the other person in a skillful way. So rather than you've really pissed me off, you know, to say, I'm just noticing that I've had that I'm having a reaction to that. So owning it, that can also be helpful as well. Let's move on. Stick to the facts. This is specifically as well when it comes to giving people feedback. Giving evidence-based feedback is really powerful. So what you have noticed rather than your interpretation of what's happened, does that make sense? So rather than me say, you know, in the meeting, you were really disrespectful to me. That's my interpretation. Other people would probably find it hard to accept that they're disrespectful, so you'll probably get a defensive response. Whereas I was to say, you interrupted me 3 times, you spoke over me a couple of times, and when I was speaking, you weren't looking at me. That's evidence, isn't it? So if you stick to the facts, it's easier for the other person to hear. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So those conversations that you avoid because you feel uncomfortable, I really encourage you to prepare for them, apply the skills and lean into them. Because no matter how experienced you are, or even how confident you become, there'll always be that degree of discomfort. Why do you think it's a good thing to experience discomfort?
That's where the growth comes in, I guess.
Yeah, I couldn't see who was saying, yeah, that's where the growth comes in. Absolutely, absolutely. What else?
It's also allowing yourself to reflect on your own as well, as much as...
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's hard to do, but you've got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. You get to reflect on yourself and an impact on you. And
The world isn't a comfortable place.
yeah,
So,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
It's easier. That's the whole point, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
Sometimes they get easier and actually cost you less emotionally.
Absolutely, it gets easier as well. Have I got 2 minutes to go? Oh my God, I've got to really whip through them. Also, I was like, Sarah, just don't worry, do 5 minutes. But also, if you're comfortable when you're having tough conversations, it might be because you're not caring enough. You know, I mean, quite a lot of people say, when it comes to talking about things in the workplace, such as difference, such as race, such as conflict, if you're feeling uncomfortable, it's because you care. You care about saying the right thing. I am now slightly speeding up. Be present and stay engaged. And that's mostly to do with sort of mastering your story as well, and being in the moment and not in your head. I love this. I don't really need to say more about it, but spend less time preparing about what you're going to say, more time preparing about how you're going to be. Maya Angelou, people will always remember how you made them feel, and they'll probably forget what you said. So be forgiving on yourself. Make sure you just, you're bringing that energy and that warmth to the conversation. This goes without saying. If you've got a tough conversation and you feel under pressure, the chances are you might talk too much. And you just keep persuading and coming up with more reasons. Get really good at getting the other person to speak. And it takes 2 things. One is listening. And there's listening and there's listening. Listen so that you learn not to speak. Sometimes we listen so we can rally our own thoughts. Stay in neutral and be curious. Be curious. One top tip, which will definitely guide you in any conversation, is to get really good at asking questions that begin with how and what. What are your thoughts? What do you think would be a good way forward? What do you think this is about? How would we work better together? What ideas have you got? What do you want from me? What will we actually do? When will we do it? I'm so passionate about helping people to say no. So I think it was your point downstairs about burnout. No, you don't need to burn out as a leader, but you definitely need to get good at saying no. And when you say no, it's not because you can't, it's not because you won't, it's not because you're weak, it's because you're saying yes to something that's much more important to you. So when we say no, it's because we're saying yes to important things. And it's really, really important that all of us get comfortable with saying no. I've got 2 teenage daughters. I wish they taught them those things at school. Say no to the things that don't feel right, that aren't for you, that you don't want to do. It will make you a much more impactful and more caring leader because you'll have more time. Beware of verbal softness. It is not unusual in a conversation when we feel something's really important to us and we want to ask somebody for something. We'll say, do you think that might be possible? If that's something you can maybe try and think about. And you're laughing, but we do it. Is that something you might be able to try? When what we really want to say is, I need you to do this on Friday. So cut out the waffle, just sort of, maybe, might, perhaps. It's waffle, cut it out. As long as you're skillful, as long as you're creating the environment, cut out the fillers. At the end of any important conversation, there needs to be a way forward. Okay, otherwise you've just had a conversation, nothing changes. At the end, what's happening as a result of this conversation? And I would encourage you to say that. Okay, we've had the conversation, what's happening? Otherwise you won't know if it's worked. I've got 3 more points, I think. You're not going to get it right all the time, and that is okay. Okay? Not every conversation is going to be perfect. One conversation won't solve everything. If a conversation goes wrong, have another conversation after it. It's totally fine. And you're not always going to be liked. And that's also okay. There's some research to say that in leadership, if you're doing your job well, 1 in 7 people might not like you on that day. Because you're giving feedback, you're saying no, you're making changes. Please do be courageous. We're so worried about saying the wrong thing, about getting cancelled, that we hold ourselves back. If you share your intent, my friend Shona, I work with in D&I work, she goes, Sarah, if you don't make mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. And I bear that in mind. Please do take care of yourself after a conversation. Sometimes when we have a conversation and we're so worried that we've hurt someone's feelings, take care of yourself after it. Check in with someone else. Get someone to tell you how fabulous you are. And then finally, my final point, just let it go. Let it go. Don't beat yourself up after a conversation. You're not a bad person. You know, you had good intentions. We all mess up. Just keep having them. Be more courageous, and it will definitely make your environment, the world, a better place. 20 top tips, okay? Thank you so much. I'll let you have my slides if you want them, and I'm going to pass over to my brilliant colleague, Errol. Hi, Errol.
Hi, everyone. So I'll tell you just a little bit about me before I kind of open the conversation and invite you to kind of help me bring the conversation along. So I've come from a slightly different space. I went to art school for a couple of years, but I fell in love with hip-hop culture as a young person. And as a young person, growing up in Northwest London, trying to find my identity, trying to find out where I fit in the world, graffiti art, hip-hop culture was, and still is, the kind of most important thing and the most brilliant thing that I've ever seen. At the heart of it, it took 4 disciplines. And said to the world, this is the way we're going to do it. It may appear to be wrong, but what that did, it just gave individuals an opportunity to express themselves in any way they want. So very early doors, there's a clash of cultures. So there's a culture which is about learning arts the proper way, learning how to sort of shade properly, do things in the correct way. And even criticism, you know, like your crit sessions were done in a fairly constructed way. And then there was hip hop. So you've got young people trying to kind of assemble themselves, manage themselves, develop their own hierarchies, develop their own identities as young people, innovating, just being extremely, extremely creative. And to this day, and I've done a lot of different things, to this day, my experiences in hip hop culture have been the most fantastic and most creative I've ever seen. And I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from today as a creative leader. So I was a creative leader at 19. Had you said that to me, I wouldn't have owned it. I would have like, well, I haven't finished my degree, I haven't got a proper job, I haven't got on the board of D&AD, I'm not a proper designer yet. So I guess there is something from my perspective around us and who we are being and what we are bringing. And also trying to open a conversation about value. So it may not be conventional. What I bring may not be written down in any books, but it might be extremely visible. So I lived in Wembley and I went to art school in South London. And along the way, I would go into pass through different boroughs, see different demographics, see different classes, etc., etc., etc. All of that, even before I got into art school, was part of my education. And so I think there is something which is around if we're talking about care, I think empathy is a big part of care. And I think there's something about cultural empathy, and not just understanding about how people are feeling and what their emotions are, but what the factors are, what factors will cause people to think or feel a particular way. You know, have there been things that have happened in one borough that will cause a particular group or demographic to feel a particular way? I remember recently being involved in the borough culture celebrations in my home borough of Brent, which was hugely impoverished, really affected by COVID, and we're asking people to kind of suddenly embrace the arts. And so I think there's something about being sensitive to kind of where people are at. But I want to stop on empathy, and not just cultural empathy, but creative empathy. And what do I mean by that? So people bring different things to the creative paradigm. And some stuff gets awards, some stuff never makes it to print or publication, and then some stuff sits on the fringe. And I guess as a creative leader, yes, you want an award, and yes, you want to be able to go and say, look, I do have a proper job just because I'm not earning money. Like, look, people are acknowledging me. But I guess there's something about, well, how do we not necessarily level the playing field, but inform the playing field? So there's stuff that I bring that I think is going to be brilliant. But I guess there is a way about how do I bring that into the arts, bring that into my creative practice, bring that into the kind of creative, the wider creative and cultural discussion about what's good and what's not. My first jobs my first interviews as a graduate, I did go back and finish my degree, a graduate designer, was with big design organisations like Conran, Pentagram, Imagination. And I had an incredible array of graffiti works, which I did in the UK and I had done abroad. And all of this is before the age of 20 and actually before I'd actually graduated. And when I shared my portfolio, me being all bright-eyed and excited, I could see the looks on people's faces as they were suitably unimpressed with what I was bringing until I showed them something which they were comfortable and familiar with. For me, this was hugely depressing, and so my graffiti work went further and further back to the back of my portfolio, and eventually left my portfolio, and I got a proper job, and I ended up working in the corporate space. Ironically, in commercial law, which is an interesting space for a graffiti artist, but let's not dwell on that. So I'm talking about creative empathy and the different types of responses that I received when I was in art school, when I was going for interviews, just trying to get a job, because I was quite naive. I actually thought the sort of job landscape would have been fair. I knew it was slightly biased against me, but I thought it would at least been fair in creative terms. But that wasn't necessarily the case. So there are a couple of things that I'm going to kind of dive into coming away from my story. The first one is space. So I've worked in big shiny buildings, I've worked in porta cabins, I've worked in prisons, I've worked in different spaces where people are experiencing different things at different times. Sometimes, especially when I went into, sort of, it wasn't corporate, it was international law, big shiny building, massive football-sized pitch foyer, hugely wasteful. But I was like, cool, I'm in. Do you know what I mean? I'm a proper designer, wearing a shirt and tie and all that kind of stuff. But what I was not aware of was the psychic space. Me being in that space and me coming from the working class community, Caribbean community in Northwest London, I was like, how do I behave here? How do people respond to me? What do I read into the way people are responding to me? Whether that's something that I suspect or something that is true. Sometimes when you enter particular spaces, you get a visceral feeling of either excitement or fear or uncertainty, and the scale and the size of the institution might put you on the back foot a bit. And suddenly from that position, you're making decisions, or you're feeling that you're trying to make decisions for the better good, or actually unsure of the decisions that you're making unless you have requisite support. Physical space can affect different people differently. So if you're leading a team of designers or just a general team, be aware of how you're navigating that space around them, encouraging them to navigate that space, the impact that that space has on you as a leader, but also trying to change the dynamics of that space. And this is probably something I was going to share later on. So I'm London-based, and I think this is my first time in Manchester, and I've done a lot of things in different places, so thank you, Manchester.
Hey.
And as soon as I got in, I was like, the vibe's really cool here. And so that was something which is at a sensory level. And so I suddenly feel comfortable. And I think there's something as creatives who are under a lot of pressure to deliver X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it's all right to just check out, you know, obviously have your slides ready, which I haven't, so I'm looking at my laptop, iPad all the time. But sometimes cutting yourself away from the things that are familiar to you is incredibly important, because it just allows you to reset. Suddenly all the things that you're super reliant on, which are on your hard drive at home or in your surroundings or your cultural space, you don't have those anymore. So sometimes, as Sarah says, letting it go is, or cutting off from the things that you rely on, is actually a pretty good thing. Communication, I think, is also really important. So in the lead up to this talk, Sarah and I had a couple of conversations, and straight away I knew she was as mad as a box of frogs, so that was amazing. But she made me feel at ease. You know, I had a lot of respect for the work that she was doing, and so in that initial conversation I got a sense that she was cool. And I'm not saying that a cool vibe is a barometer of like a kind of commercial working partnership. I'm not going to go to the head of the Royal National Ballet and say, I like your flex, where did you get your where did you get those trainers? But who knows? But I think sometimes checking in with people to kind of see where they're at before you have the big conversation is a good thing. Being aware of all the other factors that might be affecting them, being aware of people. I can only speak as a black person. I internalize a lot of stuff because there aren't many spaces for me to freak out or to shout from the hills or to cry or whatever it is. And so a lot of stuff is going on below the surface. Doesn't mean it's not going on. And this has kind of played in my relationships, but let's not dwell on that. But if I suddenly snap for no reason because you decide to watch a program that I'm not interested in, it's not because of what's going on in Emmerdale, it's just that I might be going through something. So going back to this idea of having good communications and difficult conversations, sometimes it's going to be hard. In fact, sometimes it's going to be quite messy. And I guess you have to be aware of how well you're able to deal with that mess. If you want to have a conversation about race, I'm here for it. But take a seat, because we're going to be a while. And I may sort of say some things that are really uncomfortable. So when you're having these conversations, be careful about the space that you're curating and be responsible for what comes out, because you still have to hold that person, or that person still has to feel held, even though there is a kind of detachment between your role as leader and their role as a member of the team or whatever else. So I think there's something about difficult conversations which is not just having them. And it's interesting that courage came up, because I'm curious, like what is courage? Anyone? Public speaking. Definitely courageous.
Doing something outside of your comfort zone?
Definitely. Definitely. Anyone else? No? So for me, being creative is courageous. The paradigm that was set up for me in hip-hop statute of limitations notwithstanding, is meant that some people, namely not me, could jump over a train track and go and paint on trains. Disclaimers, disclaimers. Or paint on walls, you know, dance in public spaces, whatever. All of these things that are seen as wrong are actually quite courageous. Speaking your truth as a creative person is hugely courageous because, as Sarah said, not everyone's going to like your interpretation of art or what you say. And sometimes you might be the only one standing in terms of advocating for what is true. I think creativity, courage is about being able to speak your authentic truth when you're talking about budgets, when you're talking about cutting costs, recruitment, etc., etc., etc. Sometimes it's pretty difficult to hang on to your truth. And so you kind of have to make decisions about the greater good. And what happens over time is that you find that you're not really speaking your truth at all. And I think it's really courageous to hang on to your truth and to speak it confidently and advocate for the things that you know are right, despite what accounts say, despite what the strategists say. So that's really important. What else did I want to quickly talk about? Growth. So ultimately, creative people, and I'm dwelling on creative people for the moment, creative people want to create. They want to make things. They have a motivation. So for me, it wasn't actually hip-hop. It was a generation of young people who were the sons and daughters of the Windrush generation who invented lovers rock, who kind of innovated their own fashion and poetry, etc., etc. So I looked up to somebody, and I have an autobiographical story. You will all know people, and you will all have your own individual stories about what you see as meaningful, powerful, important, essential creativity. And as you've kind of moved through the industry, you've got different techniques to how to facilitate things, how to get the resources into place, how to manage people, etc., etc. But ultimately, your practice will mean everything to you. And holding that dear is important because you're modeling that for the people around you. So equally, if your team are in a particular space, you want to do things that will facilitate their leadership and their creativity. So whether that's going to the fun fair or just doing whatever it is with the resources and the time that you have available. But also, coming back to spaces, facilitate spaces where you can just chat on a level, not as part of a review, not as part of a monthly thing, just kind of informally say to people, and only if you're up for it, I've got an open door policy and I'm up for having a conversation. It's a difficult place to be because sometimes you will get confronted, and I've been confronted many a times, and I've had to go home, lean on half a bottle of wine, half a glass of wine, and be really honest with myself. And I think part of leadership is that ongoing internal conversation about who you are being, and more importantly, why. So I think there's something about decoupling assumptions. So as a young person, I will put two ideas together to make sense of the world. As I've got older, I'm not saying that those things are untrue, but I recognize that I have a story. A lot of the people that we work with, our clients, we all have assumptions, and it's important to try and decouple those. Having group conversations, having conversations in your network about how to deal with particular challenges and difficult conversations is also really important. Part of my challenge today, when I was coming up here today, was like, okay, I'm going on last deliberately. They will have had a lot of conversations around what care is, strategies to put in place, etc., etc., etc. And so what is it that I'm going to share with them that is going to be super, super valuable and dispensing sage-like wisdom? And I was like, probably the biggest thing is me not saying anything at all. And sometimes just shutting up and listening is the most valuable thing you can do as a creative. And I don't just mean listening to what people are saying. Be aware of their body language. Be aware of their intonation. Be aware of where they're moving, or their posture. Sometimes not saying anything, particularly when you're invited to say something, is the most powerful thing you can do. Not just because it forces you to think, is what I'm about to say really important? But also it provides some space for whoever it is you're communicating with to think about what they're going to say. This is a dramatic pause, by the way. So I kind of want to ask you all, in the spirit of being quiet for a minute or two, what you think courageous, creative leadership looks like. I'll give you a minute. As he walked off the stage, he wondered to himself. And it might not be in the professional realm, it might be outside of that. But if you were kind of looking hence, like, a couple of years hence, or even give me some examples of creative leadership that you think has been somewhat creative, whether that's kind of real life, in your family, in your community. Anyone? Yes?
Failing, getting up, failing again, and getting up.
Okay. Is that you personally? You personally? Okay. What made you get up?
Because I believe in the work you're doing, and that you learn by success, but also you learn through failure, and actually you learn more when you're failing.
Okay. Are you anticipating failing more?
Yes, I just became a leader of an organisation.
Okay. You look so happy. Yes, I'm going to fail some more. Thank you so much. That is an excellent point. Learning to take L's, as my goddaughter says, learning to take a loss is just incredible. However, I'm sure you'll agree, it does suck, doesn't it? And sometimes wine just doesn't take the edge off it. But it's part of being human. And I think there's something in what you've said that also speaks to, for me, we can talk about Keir all day, but I think it's really about being human and, more importantly, not dehumanizing people. So whether that's through your behavior, your language, your leadership style, I think at the very least, just have that respect for individuals and treat them like human beings, regardless of whether they support a particular football team or whatever it is, had an affair with your ex-partner, whatever it is. Could just give me a moment. But yeah, treating people like human beings is powerful. Thank you very much. Anyone else with examples? Orange is my favourite colour, but I'll go for you because you put your hand up first. Okay.
I was going to say learning to take risks, not just in yourself, but in other people.
Okay.
So that might look like taking a risk with someone who you feel like is not quite at a stage to take that step yet, but taking that risk and believing in them and pushing them forward, I think, yeah, that's...
What's the cost of taking that risk? And is it worth taking?
I think it's always worth taking. And I come from, that's coming from a person who maybe I wish someone would take that risk on me.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So, yeah, I think what is the risk? What that person might fail, but I think it's creating that space that allows people to fail.
Would you be prepared to fail if somebody rolled 7 on you? Or is that something, would that be part of your thinking? You would be thinking, what if it goes wrong? Would you just be thinking, I'm going to be brilliant at this and or do my best?
No, I think I would be more prepared to think, what if it goes wrong, if the space would allow me to, if I felt like I was going to be allowed to fail. So being allowed to make a mistake and being like, oh, it's okay.
Great point. Great point. Because sometimes as new leaders, you kind of feel this is everything. And I've made mistakes that internally I've made seem everything. And everyone's moved on and I'm still on this thing that I did for whatever reason. Thank you, that was brilliant, thank you.
So I was going to say to inspire, and I don't mean any sort of big grand gestures of being an inspirational person, but I mean in the small things, like inspired by being honest, inspired by being that person who people can turn to, and inspired by your behaviours, as opposed to sort of leading from the front, but bringing everyone with you, but being an inspiration.
Give me an example, or a little example of, not necessarily big picture, heroic inspiration, but just...
It's just more about your behaviours, and it's bringing people with you because they respect you, they look to you to be that inspiration in the small things. And it's not necessarily about them liking you, but it's just it's the trust, it's just building that bond and that relationship professionally, and leading from the front, but not in a look at me sort of way.
So is it almost like watching how other people get on with it, or how they do it in a particular way, which you know they may be going through a lot of stuff, but they seem to be managing, and actually they seem to be doing it really, really well.
But only if it's authentic and honest. So it's not a case of putting on persona or always coping. But it's about people trusting you and following you because you are inspiring them to do that.
Yeah. What's interesting about what you're saying is, I guarantee you, everyone here will be an inspiration to someone. The crazy thing is, in this hyper-vigilant creative world that we live in, we are unaware, despite our followers on LinkedIn and social media, we are really unaware of how people really see us. And it's not the kind of super cool thing like, oh, look, I've done another project and here's loads of pictures about it. But it just might be the interaction that you would have had with them at a particular event. It could be a response to an email. It could be, like you say, it could be literally anything. And I think that's, as creative leaders, I think that's part of the blessing, is that you kind of get to work creatively and have a kind of a slightly more intimate relationship with people in terms of what you do, but also and it's hard to measure. It's hard to measure how inspiring or how much impact you're having on someone, but trust me, even if it's a little thing, it lasts a lifetime. You know, I started, when I was doing graffiti, I met a sculptor who invited us into his studio, nothing to do with the fact that he offered us weed, nothing to do with that. Really cool guy. I can't remember what happened there. But to this day, and he's quite a well-known sculptor, to this day I stay in touch because it was him that made me think graffiti was art. So I conflated these two ideas and I'm like, okay, so yeah, amazing point. Any other examples of creative leadership? I feel like question time. This is so cool. I haven't got my glasses.
Time.
The last question from the floor.
Mine would be joy and fun. I think, and I think I said this earlier in the bigger room about celebrating. I think to put your tools down and to just all have fun and have a good time. I feel like over the last kind of however long we've lost an element of that. And like even listening to you and Sarah today, you're making us laugh and we're smiling and we're having a good time. I think you can't underestimate the power of joy and actually having fun, because I think that sometimes is real leadership.
Is it difficult to be joyous if the last project you did didn't go well, or the project that you've now got to do has only got half the budget, or you've had to lay somebody off? Is that really difficult?
The arts and culture landscape is really hard, and so actually it feels like work sometimes creating joy and just having joy in the space. So I think, leaders that can create that joy and fun are being really courageous actually sometimes.
Yeah, and would you say it's a nice to have or an essential?
Essential.
Okay, I'd agree.
Yeah.
Apparently they want me off. You've been a wonderful audience. Thanks very much. I'm here Tuesdays and Thursdays. Try the wine. It's amazing.